Thank you very much, James. So I'm Hilary Sutcliffe. I'm from an NGO called Society Inside, and we're about having people at the heart of innovation instead of just making money and scientific kudos. And I'm your moderator for today. So we've got the trains, we've got the children, we've got the building work. So when your phone goes off, no one's even going to hear it, so you don't have to bother this time. So the plan is each of the speakers will give 5 or so minutes of discussion. And then we have a sort of talk and discussion amongst ourselves. And I'm not to discourage arguments, but no fisticuffs. So without any further ado, I shall introduce our first speaker, who's going to tell us what robomorphisation actually is, which is going to be a relief. So Beth Singler, please go ahead.
Yes. So I am to blame for half of this title. Robomorphisation, I will explain. Retrofit Human came from Ruman Chowdhury, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us, but I think I can do her probably justice in explaining what I think she was trying to get to with this phrase. So robomorphisation, I'm using, obviously, oh, actually, sorry, start with me. I forgot I'm going to introduce myself. So I am Dr. Beth Singler. I'm an anthropologist at the University of Cambridge, and what I do in general is pay attention to what people think about machines that might think, and the kinds of spaces I do that in include, you'll see some various science fiction references there, a great part of my job being able to sit in my office and watch sci-fi, read sci-fi books. You might recognize some images there from the robots exhibition at the Science Museum last year. I do a lot of my research online. I'm paying attention to the conversations people are having. I'm a bit of a digital ethnographer, so you can see some tweets and some memes and some GIFs. I've also been out to Japan, had a look around in the spaces where people are interacting with and considering robots and their relationships with them. So I do a variety of things, but really what I'm doing, as I say, is thinking about how we are responding to the concept of artificial intelligence, whether it's embodied as robots, whether it's in our science fiction, in our fantasies, in our hopes, and our fears, and what that means about us as humans as well. If we're reflecting on ourselves through artificial intelligence, where do we think we are and what do we think we're up to? So that's a quick summary of the stuff I've been doing for roughly the last 5 years. I could tweet it too, that would be even shorter. But in this case, I want to talk about anthropomorphisation and what I'm calling robomorphisation. This has caused a bit of consternation that it's an unfamiliar term and a little different, but someone yesterday tried to use mechanised morphisation and it came out a bit jumbled. I think sticking with robomorphisation might work better. It's slightly easier to say, although of course the word robot is contestable. So in my work, I've been thinking about how we transform the human into a machine metaphorically, how we understand through analogy, the human as machine. And this means, has the effect of treating humans as machines, and also the projection of machine attributes onto humans. And in my work, I've been thinking through some of the classical ideas of anthropomorphism from anthropology. So here, for example, the work of Boyer, cognitive anthropologist, who defines anthropomorphism as the intentional projection of human attributes onto the non-human. And he breaks this down into 5 intentional projections, the most common of which he describes as being intentional psychology, seeing the mind in a place that is non-human, specifically. Now, I think when it comes to robomorphisation, we don't necessarily see the mind in the human because we assume the mind is in the human. When we're turning humans into robots, we're using analogies to the anatomical structure. So, for example, I've often heard people say things like humans being hardwired for anthropomorphism. Our language has changed to fit the level of technology that we're thinking through with analogically. Or treating human psychology, the mind, however broadly defined, as able to cope with mechanical rote tasks. We're turning the human into the machine by assuming that we are completely machine-like in our capabilities and our minds. So we have a very long history of this kind of metaphorical thinking. So, for example, in this image here, we've got the celestial bodies, the cosmology as known then, related to the technology of the time, astrology, and the human as the great cosmos writ small. So we see the human as in relation to the universe, the cosmos, and that informs our thinking about where we fit in the universe. There's examples as well of organic metaphors. So here we have the concept of the family tree, where our seed and our offspring, we start using terms that relate to biological, organic conceptions. And of course, you can see these images are very old. This is a long history that we've had these kind of conceptions of the human. But as we get closer and closer to the present day, we start getting more mechanical analogies. As our technology advances, we lay that technology over our conception of the human. So this image here, for a Chinese image, where you see the human being as the factory almost, where you've got a big digger hands and the coal furnace. And we're placing on top of our conception of the human what the latest technology is. And that affects how we think of the human. And then we get even more recently, Demetra, who gave us the idea of the human as machine. A lot of people talk about Descartes and his conception of mind and machine, human as machine, but actually this work precedes it, comes after him and actually clarifies that relationship and is very impactful on our contemporary conception and where we get to today with the technological mind, the mind as computer, humans as basically artificial intelligence. The lines are being blurred. And what's the impact of this robomorphization? Well, being able to treat and perceive humans as machines means you can give them machine-like tasks to do. You may be familiar with recent cases of people rebelling against this conception, particularly at Amazon, where you can see this lady here standing with a sign saying, "We are not robots, we do not want to be treated like robots." And the other examples I have there, obviously another packing situation somewhere like Amazon, or a call center where the space that we are allowing people to be humans within is smaller and smaller as they are treated more and more like parts of the machine. And in terms of the retrofit human, by seeing humans as machine-like, we can fit them into the system of existing machinery. So this quote here is quite long, but I've highlighted some of the pertinent parts. This is from someone who enjoyed being contracted out as a part of Amazon's Mechanical Turk, taking on small tasks. But this person is quite happy to see themselves as a part of the artificial intelligence. They recognize that AI, in many forms that it exists now, cannot work correctly without humans in the loop. Humans still doing some of the small tasks that make it possible for artificial intelligence to appear intelligence. But the problem, of course, and I've highlighted at the bottom, that he wasn't being paid. By reducing the human down to the machine and recognize that we don't pay machines, we treat them as tools, we increasingly see humans as having less value and worth and rights in that regard as well. Similarly with the Amazon workers refusing to be treated as robots and not being given significant breaks or the kinds of conditions that they deserve. So when it comes to the term retrofitting the human, we've sort of set up this scenario in our society where the human can be seen as machine-like, but also we see the rights of the machine dominating our human rights in the sense of we shift our behaviours and our perceptions to suit what the machine is capable of. So behaving to suit the system, the machine, the artificial intelligence, rather than the other way around. Now, I don't know about you, I've been through quite a few of these automated passport control systems. I normally wear glasses, I'm wearing lenses today, and often you have to flick your glasses off. I wouldn't have to do that with a human being because we have a greater sense of perception of what faces look like. We can adjust for glasses, not glasses. But my behaviour suits the machine better if I do that. I also queue up in line and go through the different cargo bay type areas specifically to suit the machine. And likewise, these two other examples here where we're talking about the information that we put out into the world, whether it's our CVs or if you're a content producer on Instagram. I'm not myself, but people do things like that. How to tell the Instagram algorithm that you're awesome, so shifting your behavior, your outputs to suit the algorithm, to get more hits, to get more likes, for whatever benefit that brings you, or how to write a resume to appeal to robot recruiters, recognizing that CVs have to be presented in particular ways with particular attributes highlighted for some of these more automated systems. We are automating our behavior to fit in with these systems. So I'll leave it there. We've got some fantastic speakers who are also going to bring their reflections on this topic, but I thought I'd lay out the field and these two phrases for you just quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and I'm not just being a lazy moderator. I'm told I'm just going to straight on to David Ewing Duncan, who's going to introduce to us his writing and work as an author and a consultant.
Thank you very much. And fascinating. I wondered what that term meant, and now I'm happy I know. So I'd like to introduce another term. It's a little, I think it has fewer syllables. It's called technophrenia, and it's a little bit like schizophrenia. And I just wanted to talk for a minute about how we love and fear robots, AI, basically technology in general. And I will also tell you a little bit about what I do. I'm a writer. I write for Wired, New York Times, many other publications. I've written a bunch of books. But mostly I'm fascinated by how all the technology that we're developing now at an incredibly fast pace, how it affects us as humans. And I guess we got to go with vice versa, right? How do we impact the technology, given the last talk. But this whole love and fear question is fascinating because the same people, in fact, you all, many of you that sit around, you talk about how great your company is and the AI, how AI is going to save the world and you're designing it. You also go home at night and watch these incredibly dystopic sci-fi, like Altered Carbon and Westworld. So what's going on with that? So I'm going to propose that we develop a new app, a new technology, I don't know, a new analytical method called the Robo Love Fear Meter. And this is something that it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's also somewhat serious because I think we need to understand this love affair we have with technology and our fear. Those are two aspects of humanity. And if you could imagine this love-fear meter, it might have negatives, positives, which way we would go. And for instance, I would put under, the love part, at least when it first came out, something like Siri, maybe just a +1 on a scale of, say, 1 to 5. But we'd also kind of put it on -1 because it doesn't always work, as we know. And you can skip ahead to what we, I guess, are aiming for here, maybe, like a robo-utopia. And then on the other side, what we hope to avoid, the fear, which is a robo-apocalypse, and then all the stuff in between. And so this book that is about to come out that I wrote, it's coming out in about a month, called Talking to Robots. I actually get into individual types of robots. And there is this love and fear sort of theme. There's a lot more going on as well. But it's really trying to remind us, okay, we have this sense of, when our smartphones came out, I mean, everybody, oh my God, I can do that. And we're only now finding out, I mean, there's actually, I've got to memorize this word, but there is a medical condition of leaning over to look at your phone now. It's a crick in your neck that doctors are now beginning to have to treat. So clearly there are, there are pluses and minuses for all of this. So, for instance, in a politician bot, by the way, how many here would like to have a prime minister, or in my country, a president who was a robot? Anybody? Okay, 3 or 4 people. All right, so that might be something we would really love. In fact, there are people developing this technology. AI systems are working in government now on fairly small scale, but there are people that think a robot or AI system would be fair. I mean, they wouldn't have to sleep. They wouldn't be like certain politicians in my country playing golf most of the time. They would actually be serving the people. So there are lots of reasons why you might want to have an AI politician. But this is the fear, which is, Orwell's 1984, Big Brother. And we're seeing both of these, by the way, manifest in the world right now as we're starting to build out some of these systems on how governments and politics might be using this. So another robot that's in the book, and this is something, by the way, that I write mostly about. I mostly write about genomics, synthetic biology. That's my field. So I've expanded out a little bit in the book into some other fields. But a synthetic me bot, this is where we use synthetic biology, which is gene editing, even writing entire new genomes, which is being done on a small scale with small organisms, where you literally write all of the DNA. And we're not going to talk a lot about that on the panel, but this is another aspect of all of this. I mean, we're talking about hardware, but our body also has its programming. We have, the biological parts that make us. And I actually believe in the distant future that it'll be less hardware and more biology. But anyway, that's my point of view. But wouldn't you love to have a body that's young and basically impervious and you don't have to worry about disease and a lot of other things? So that's the love part of this. And in my part of the world, I just moved out of Silicon Valley. There are a lot of people that would like to see this. Here's the fear, the Borg. So this is the way this thing could go. This is one of my favorite ones, the Teddy bot. And I asked a number of interesting people, by the way, to help me with these robots. And you may have heard of Kevin Kelly, the futurist, who wrote The Inevitable and some other books. He's a marvelous writer, one of the original founders of Wired Magazine, actually. His robot was a teddy bot. And this really surprised me. I didn't expect Kevin Kelly to come up with a teddy bot, but this would be a robot that basically raises our children. And when I did my research, I found out there are a lot of people developing this. And these things would be babysitters, they would be teachers, they would be security guards, all aspects. And you can imagine if this actually worked, and maybe or maybe not, they're sentient in the future. But we, of course, will love these, especially when we're little children, our children, just like we love teddy bots that aren't mechanical. And at some point, maybe we'll discard them. But we can imagine how powerful such a technology might be. I mean, heck, just to have a little time to go out with friends and not have to worry about getting a sitter, if you want to get it down to the mundane. But here's the interesting part about this. Like, hi, I'm Teddy. Program me to teach your children what to believe. What would that be? And, would it be liberal, conservative? On and on and on, different religions, all kinds of possibilities here. And this is, of course, the idea here is that almost all AI systems at some point that are operating at the level of human emotion, and we're designing a bunch of these systems, who is going to design this? Who's going to program in the ethics and the morality? And starting with these little robots, as I said, are being designed right now. And also to take care of the elderly. I mean, who designs that into the system? And so that's the fear. And then I just wanted to end with a fun little robot, because I happen to actually really love espresso and cappuccino and pretty much any form of coffee. So in the future, and again, this is actually in development right now, IBM has a patent actually on a coffee delivery bot, a drone that you'd summon, it would bring your, and what they're designing right now is one that would bring it in a large office, like the coffee centers across the office. It would actually fly through the air and come to your station and deliver your coffee. But this could be used, obviously, you could order it in the morning, and it could be like Uber. And for instance, Coffee Bot Fred. Okay, you're on your app, you're like, oh my God, my coffee's coming in 3 minutes. I'm so happy. You're still in bed. You're waiting for your morning cup of coffee. So you would love that, right? Who wouldn't love that? Except then you find out, oh my God, CoffeeBot Fred is stuck in traffic, drone traffic. There's so many drones in the future. Stressed. And then we find out it's here. Oh my God, finally I get my cup of coffee. And we love that. But then we find out, because this is actually in the IBM patents for this particular machine, it will have biometrics that will check your pulse rate. It can detect whether you're anxious or not in various moods. It might decide, I'm sorry, but you are too stressed out to have another cup of coffee. And I would just want to, I don't know, throw it out the window, except it's rating you just like an Uber, and it only gives you a 1 star. So we'll see how that goes in the future. The point here is, with all of this issue of love, fear, and technophrenia, and I don't know if you're among those people that talk about how wonderful this is going to be by day and go home and watch Westworld at night. But we are in an era right now, whether we realize it or not, and I'm a historian, whatever that means, but we learn how to look in broad sweeps of history. And this is what I call the early robot era, or ERE. And what we're doing now will affect many generations to come, I think arguably in a more profound way than perhaps ever, at least for technology. And that's a big statement, because there's been a lot of amazing technologies that have affected humanity. But we have a particular responsibility right now, because we're writing the base code for all of this. We're setting it up. And you can decide yourself how we're doing. But it is imperative, I believe, that we understand this dichotomy and even this schizophrenia about love and fear that we have for these. We are going to love these technologies because they're convenient. They bring you your coffee in the morning and hopefully let you actually drink it. But we have to also listen to our fears. And sometimes we dismiss these. I mean, you're selling your company. There's a lot of hype around these things, and there are reasons for that. But we really need to listen to this. We need to understand it. And whether we have a robo love fear meter, who knows, some kind of device that can tell us how to measure that. But let's do that. And I'm an observer here of what you all are doing, and that's one of my observations, that we really, really do need to understand that, and our children and grandchildren and on will thank us for it. Anyway, this is a book that's coming out on July 16th. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And now I'm going to introduce someone who does definitely need no introduction at all. This is Jeanette Winterson, the author, who's going to talk to you about her new book.
I'm not going to stand over there. I'm not even going to talk to you about my book, actually.
Because
if you want to know about that, you can come tonight, because I'll be doing another gig about my book here tonight. So come along and I'll talk to you about Frankenstein. What I want to just pick up on, really, from listening to this morning, what David just said about the bots, of course, the bot that is manufactured most at the moment is the sex bot. Right? You can buy one for $3,000, you can buy one for $25,000, and China and America are busy manufacturing sex bots. Now, in China, there's a good reason for this. Because of the one-child policy, there are now 33 million Chinese men who will never have a Chinese partner. And robots are being marketed as a viable alternative to this problem. You know, what goes around comes around. If you're going to strangle girls and chuck them in paddy fields and celebrate men, you're going to get a problem, and China has one. So at the moment, they're looking for a technological fix. What will this look like? Will it be like the Stepford Wives? I mean, the first movie, where guys are going to look around and think, you know what, women, especially feminists, what did Dominic Raab call feminists? Obnoxious feminists? Contender for the Conservative leadership, feminists are obnoxious bigots. So would there be a point where this technology could be used against women? Probably yes. Why? Because women are not going into computing science. And when they do go into computing science, they don't stay in computing science because they can't stand the geeky, frat dorm, asocial, puerile atmosphere of the people in the office. So they come out again. You know, the best thing that you could do if you have daughters is to teach them to code and to help them to stay there somehow. Not to give up all their ambitions or everything they might want to do, but to bring them in to this brave new world, which looks like it might be a new exclusion zone for women. In the last 100 years, think how much women have achieved in the Western world. You know, simply things like voting. You know, in Switzerland, it took till 1974, but, you know, they invented the cuckoo clock. But we have done so much in the Western world by removing prejudice, by removing barriers, and women have just rushed ahead, and this has been a fantastic thing. It turned out there wasn't such a thing as the female brain, and there still isn't. It just turned out there was a lot of prejudice and a lot of hardwired anxiety about what would happen if women came out of the home and started to do whatever they wanted to do with their potential. But where we are now frightens me as a woman, because everywhere I look, I see machine learning being done by guys. I see the things that we're inventing both with bots and with a little bit more sophisticated AI is happening with guys, and machine programming is not neutral. There is no such thing as neutral. There is no such thing as objective. There is only the amalgam of education, of prejudices, of social class, of money, of standpoint in time and history, of who you are, where you are, what you learned. All of that is going into the programming. It's not a blank canvas. You know, the brave new world is not a nirvana that will suddenly be clean and beautiful, because we've made it. And what have humans ever done that was clean and beautiful that didn't backfire on us later? You know, I come from Manchester, and that was the home of the first big revolution, the Industrial Revolution, that severed forever our links with the land and with an agricultural society that changed the way human beings did business. You know, people look back on that, those 12-hour days in the factory, and they think, how could anybody even behave like that? It was so inhuman. That's how we got the trades unions. That's how we got regulation. No, we wouldn't have children crawling under the looms, actually, and we couldn't make people work 6 days a week for 12 hours. The British novelist Mrs. Gaskell, she went into a factory in Manchester, and she said, I have seen hell, and it is white. And that was because of the cotton dust everywhere. There were no extractor fans then. People were breathing this stuff. The average age, if you lived in Manchester and worked in a factory, you'd be dead at 33, and you'd be lucky to get there. So there you have, at that point, the richest city in the world, Manchester, enormous prosperity, generating so much money, giving a life expectancy to most of the people who were generating that money of 33 years, 15,000 slum dwellings, that's 2 rooms underground, housing on average 10 people, no running water, no sanitation. That's what she did. So why do you think, I'm sure you know, communism happened? There's Marx and Engels walking around Manchester. And Engels writes a book, The State of the Working Class in England, and he looks around and he says to his friend Karl Marx, this is what happens when men regard each other only as useful objects. The soul stripped away, the feeling stripped away. You know, we do go back to Descartes with that, I think, therefore I am. Fuck that, you feel. You know, the limbic system is designed to take precedence over the neural highway. You cannot have a thought without a feeling. Everything you do is an emotional response. You know, that whole business of let's have logic, let's have objectivity, let's pretend that we can cut out the emotional response. It's always been bollocks, and it is now. And I don't want to see that go forward into the world that's happening with AI, artificial intelligence, robotics, whatever it is. I don't want to see it happen. That's partly why we do need women in the zone, not because women have different brains, but because we are socialized differently. We're socialized to feel. We're socialized to care. We know that the bottom line isn't just about the GDP. We know it's about what happens when you go home to your family. Do you have to have 3 jobs to feed that family? What happens when your partner's so stressed that your relationship falls down? All of these things, that's the real world, and that's the world that we have to manage with this future that we're creating now. We can look back historically and say, okay, what happened the first time there was a massive revolution? It took about 100 years for the good side of it all to start to trickle down to ordinary people so that living standards were raised, so that there was prosperity, so that it wasn't simply regarding us as useful objects. Where we are now, I fear, might be a time when we look around and we say, this is what happens when people regard each other as useless objects, when we start to make the human being redundant, when we think that we can be written out, when we look at a world where we will matter less. But all our feelings are still there, all our hopes and dreams are still there, all the things we always have. What do people want to do? They want clean water, good food, a safe place to live, where they won't be bombed every 5 minutes. They don't want to be refugees or migrants. They want to raise their children, think their kids are going to have a better future. They want education, they want meaning, they want love. That has not changed in the course of history. What we can do now, all of us, as we stand here really at the beginning of something extraordinary, amazing, possible, the human dream, is to say, well, what is it to be human? What shall we protect? What's off limits? What's not for sale? You know, what's outside of the cash nexus? What do we want to see when we start programming? And how will we bring women into this as equals in society? Would you think about that? Thank you.
Fantastic, Jeanette. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Follow that, Jack Stilgoe.
Yeah. Thanks, Hilary. I'll stand up so you can see me. So I'm an academic. I teach science and technology policy at University College London. I'm not going to give you the hardcore reading list, though. The first thing on my reading list would be Jeanette's book that I finished last night and is absolutely mind-blowing. As you would have gathered from what Jeanette said. I mean, basically what I want to say is what she said. The second thing, though, that I would just want to introduce as a reading list, or rather as a viewing requirement, is the scene from The Wizard of Oz, where the voice says, "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain," when Toto pulls back the curtain. And I want to just ask us to pay a lot of attention to what is going on behind the curtain. So I'm a social scientist that studies hype around science and technology. I now run a project called Driverless Futures that is all about the potential politics of self-driving cars. Here is a technology where a huge amount is expected of them. People are asking some questions, but overlooking other questions. And I think, yes, let's ask some ethical questions, but crucially, let's ask some old-fashioned political questions about who is likely to benefit, who says, who's making the decisions, and why that might matter in the various possible futures that might involve self-driving technology. So the self-driving car is a fascinating case study of artificial intelligence meeting the real world, right? It's AI meeting 2 tons of steel occasionally meeting human flesh, where quite quickly the real world becomes unavoidable. And those questions that we need to ask across all of emerging technologies become apparent. I am particularly interested in what it would actually take to make a self-driving car work. Some of you have probably been to talks already at CogX about self-driving cars and what AI can do to realize this task that 10 years ago would have seemed utterly impossible, right? And yet we have gone from impossible to inevitable extraordinarily quickly, without even time to catch our breath. We are now in a situation where the promise, the inevitability, is that we will be having cars driven by robots on our streets. In some parts of the world, that is already happening. It is a reality. And yet, it still looks impossible in some parts of the world, in some contexts. We have situations like, for example, rural Wales or the south of Devon, right, where roads are unrecognizable from the sorts of roads where self-driving cars are still being tested, where it may well be that that is just seen as too hard a test case, right, where the difficulties of this test case for artificial intelligence just become unavoidable. And there, I think, we get into some interesting questions of what it actually takes to make technology work in the real world. And Beth's already talked about a lot of this. It's about what we as humans need to do in order to adapt to technology, to make it work, to realize the claims that are made for technology about how it will replace human labor. In order to do that, other stuff needs to happen across all sorts of domains, right? Not just in high-tech, futuristic technologies. We all know it. We all, when we encounter a supermarket self-checkout, we are all acutely aware of the additional human labor that we have to engage in order to make this technology do what its owners would like it to do, right? The supermarket checkout requires those forms of hidden labor. Similarly, a self-driving car, you don't hear much about it at these sorts of conferences. You hear about the AI. You don't hear so much about the mapping that goes into teaching these things how to drive. You don't hear so much about the data systems that are required in order to realize that task. And that's still just getting the car to work. Roads are not like chessboards, right? Driving is not a game. Roads are conversational spaces that involve awkward others that occasionally behave not just as other parts of the world, but also as active agents in the world. They might be mischievous. Road users might recognize a self-driving car and say, oh, that doesn't look like something that I recognize. I wonder what it will do if I do this, right? People do that stuff. At its most extreme end, people will hack technologies. People will engage with technologies in malicious ways. But there's a full spectrum of human behavior before we get to that point. And here, history should be our guide. When the car arrived in American cities in the early stages of the 20th century, what happened was a technology replete with huge promises about its benefits for mobility and its benefits for safety. You know, this was going to be more reliable. The horseless carriage was going to be a more reliable means of transport than the horse and cart. Those promises persuaded cities to change the way that they organized public space, to change the way that they organized transport. Some people benefited from it, and those benefits for mobility were extraordinary. But in some cases, the redesigning of American cities is a problem that we are now trying to reverse. We all realize, walking around London, that the streets that we walk on are intensely political spaces. We need to think about these questions with respect to self-driving cars now, before we get to a stage at which the benefits of self-driving cars are sold as so obvious that we end up handing over our streets to benefit some and not others. I've probably run out of time, so I'll leave it there and we can pick up anything else in the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jack. And our last speaker doesn't live in any ivory towers like universities and things like that. This is the guy that makes the stuff. So Fernando Lucini from Accenture is a roboticist and
I'm an engineer.
An engineer.
And I'm not going to get up because we didn't say we were going to get up, and I'm really comfy and my back hurts.
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't.
Yeah, I've staged me, Jack.
You know, Jeanette did, and
So I work for a company called Accenture. Obviously, our life is to make these things work at customers and get value from them. And fascinatingly, Ruman Chaudhary, who was representing Accenture, came up with this idea of the retrofit human. And I did call her as a good engineer and say, "What are you on about? What does this mean?" And she was explaining to me this idea that she thought about it as a design problem. The car was a good example Jack and I were talking about, which is if you were to solve the problem of transport, how would you start? But the truth is what we do is we take the problem as we've solved it today and we stick a bit of technology on it, right? And she was very, very challenging around that. And as an engineer representing what customers do every day, I struggled a bit with that. Because I thought, hold on. Our fundamental needs are probably the same today as they're going to be tomorrow. The evolution will happen, but today you need water, you need safety, you need all these things, and the people that I work with give you these things, banking or water or gas or whatever. And the idea of retrofitting is the only natural way for these big companies to solve immediate problems today and optimize these things. So to give you a better rate of water, can they do something intelligent in how they measure this water? I'll give you an example. Can they be really clever about how they manage a turbine between 2 points that gives you cheaper electricity? They're not reinventing the way they're making electricity. They're just trying to figure out how to optimize. So the retrofit, I think, is something we just have to think a little bit in the real world. It's a natural thing. And Jeanette, to your point, beginnings are difficult things, right? And it might sound like we've been in the AI journey for 20 years. We haven't. The beginning is now when it's most meaningful. And I always use the example with my customers of steampunk. Anybody into steampunk? Yeah, so steampunk, you put steam into everything. You think something we're doing today, you stick some a steam machine on it. So the water cooler will have a steam machine on it that pumps up just to give you some water, right? Our customers are kind of steampunking, right? They're sitting there thinking, right, pricing I'm going to give you pricing for a banking product. What's the best thing I can do? Well, I'm going to take what I know and retrofit it with my steam pump and make it work for you cheaper. And this is entirely normal. And interestingly, analogies are really difficult things for companies, just so we level set here. So some of the analogies we use in academia, which are wonderful to hear, and I get a lot of pleasure out of them, create deep confusion in customers that they want to do 3 or 4 simple things. They want to find things that are valuable and make those work, right? And if retrofitting is the answer, God bless, we do that. They just want to figure out, once they figure out what those things are, they want to do more of that so everybody can get more value, right? Simple stuff. They want to do it in a way that's ethical. All companies try to be ethical, and we can be really cynical about it, but and there might be exceptions, but we try to be ethical about it. And then we try to revolve our people so we can change into this new economy. And think about electricity maybe as an example, or say, steam is a good one. The first thing we did with steam is take a horse-drawn carriage and stick an engine on it, right? We didn't try to rethink the whole principle. And with electricity, it was a little bit like that at the beginning. So I'd have you all have a think about the fact that whilst we think very deeply about how to change the world around us, the truth is the little steps are going to be very close to what humans do. If you're a law firm, what you want to do is have people read contracts all day? Possibly not. You want them to be using their brain in a way that's better for society and better for the firm, and not read signatures in documents all day. Fine. Again, it's a retrofit, but it's a very, very useful one. And I worry deeply about some of the principles that you've brought. Being an engineer and having observed firsthand some of this, variety is also going to change some of this. Variety, in all its senses, is going to help change the world of AI. But as it regards to retrofitting, I'm going to not be the poo-pooer of the idea of we should be designing these purist systems. But the way I put it is, if you were to redesign life now in Spain, so without the physical limitations we have, gravity, etc., what would you do? We don't have that luxury. We can't just stop life today and figure out how to deal with it without gravity, or without electricity, or without steam. So I think we just have to be slower in our going into the AI world. And the last point I'll make as well is the practical guy here in the room. The hype thing is just ridiculous, and Jack and I were having some fun with that. The hype is also ridiculous. I mean, and I have to read science fiction in my own time, but I envy you. and the truth is I love it deeply, but the hype is also making some of the companies around you have to exaggerate what they're trying to do to try to fit to your vision of what this AI thing is going to bring you. And it's just not fair. It's not fair. My wife is an engineer, is an AI engineer, and she sits there thinking of things to do, and half of the things I tell her, she thinks, that's boring. And I'm saying, well, yeah, but it's useful. Because we've just hyped this so much that we're trying to fix problems that don't exist. So let's fix problems that exist, and let's be okay with retrofitting, as long as it leads us to, as Jeanette says, to goodness. It leads us to value, leads us to parity, leads us to these things. Anyway, so the practical engineer.
What do you ask your wife to do? She says is boring.
Because I read the science fiction books, and I say, you know, can we just have somewhere to, you know, to keep these kids entertained all day? So I don't have to. I have a 10-year-old deeply autistic child.
Right.
So Jacob sees the world in a way that is totally contrary to what I've just said now. He sees the world in such a unique way that nobody else sees it the same as him. And I keep on asking Abby to write AI that's going to understand and work with Jacob. Not form him. We don't want to form him in any way. He's magic as he is. But how do I extract that magic out of Jacob? Because he interacts better with this world than he interacts with me. So I ask her to create machines that understand the world that Jacob lives in, which is a world of obsessions around Marty McFly and, you know, things like that, you know, from the movies, right? That's what I ask her to make, and then she looks at me and goes, "Can I just write you some speech recognition?"
So this could be one of your teddy bots.
Yes.
You need to hook up
Oh,
your
yeah, you
wife.
need
with
to
Yeah, no, we have to wire people up.
Go.
There is a lab working with autistic children and robots. You may have already come across them, but I can share.
I live in
links.
Cambridge, so we're neighbours.
Oh, okay. Not in Cambridge. They're actually in Bristol, I think, or Bath. But I can share that later.
Sorry, Hilary, that's me done.
Sorry,
No,
that was
everybody's got me.
We're starting the conversation
They're
already.
free for all. This is going to be the laziest moderating session ever because they're all just going to talk. Answer that question of Jeanette's there as well and the teddy bot.
Well, I mean, the surprising thing is, you all may know this, some of you in the audience may know, is how many people are trying to develop a teddy bot. And, you know, my role in this is to ask the questions, okay, let's say you succeed. And like I said, I mostly deal in synthetic biology, and that's even a scarier question or a more interesting question in some ways. You know, what happens if you succeed? But I think that's what we're here about. But there's a reason why you would like to have something that's that's a little more well, it fulfills that desire. Because we have such a bizarre intersection happening right now between these useful machines. I mean, a robot, if you go into a factory, it's really boring if you're looking for, some kind of exciting machine. It's just a giant arm. It takes a car door. It welds it on. It takes the next one. And that's really what robotics mostly is now. It's not that interesting in terms of what the things we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And even us up here having this panel today, why are we even talking about this in the sense of, what are these machines or these artificial beings or whatever they are? What are they bringing out of us that we are so just tied up in knots to talk about? And I would argue we've always done this in a way because we're, as Beth said, we're trying to understand ourselves. And when you start talking about sex bots, yes, there is a sex bot in the book, by the way. Just want to make sure everybody knows that. But we've had goddesses.
It's a female sex bot.
Well, yeah. I mean, there actually are. There are male sex bots being made, but they're not selling. So maybe that tells you something right there. But just the final point here is that, I mean, we've been trying to understand love and sex and relationships since the beginning. We've had goddesses of love, and there, believe it or not, have been a few gods of love. You can take another subject like war. We've had gods of war. Why do we fight wars? Why are we so violent sometimes? What is the good and bad of human nature? So,
I mean, for me, the teddy bot strikes me as just an iPad with a furry jacket on, isn't it? So, Jack, really, how we're talking here about let's get real, what can be done, a human-centered fourth industrial revolution. I hear that a lot. So what do you think practically can be done? What do we as individuals, what does Fernando as a company sort of need to do differently? Because it is actually happening and we are a little bit not as in control as we would like to be.
I mean, I think where Fernando's perspective becomes hugely important is that he is, so from the conversation that we were having before, he's in the business of working out what problems technology is actually trying to solve, and whether that relationship is a good one. And I think it's, I mean, it's a sort of obvious question: is what are you trying to do with this technology? And yet we don't ask it. Right? One of the reasons why we have sort of recognized the build-up of technological and political power in a place like Silicon Valley, and expressed concern about that, is because there is this sense that the problems that are currently being targeted are not universal ones, and therefore the beneficiaries will not be everybody, and potentially the beneficiaries will just be a small group of people who are already doing very nicely. Right? The suspicion is that the people who've got it made will keep making things for themselves. They will target their own problems or the problems of those around them. And this gets to the question of, who is involved in making. It's not just a representation and diversity for diversity's sake question. It's a genuine, it's a really important question about the things that come out of innovation, right? The things that come out of innovation depend on the people that are doing the innovations and the problems that they choose to target their technologies with.
As well as the models of the human that they are working with that then filter down to the public perception. So one of my favorite quotes from Robert Lewinsky, who's one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence, says that he talks about how the founding fathers of artificial intelligence decided what they thought smartness was, what intelligence was, and they looked at themselves and they said, well, we can solve theorems and play chess. So if artificial intelligence can do that, it must be intelligent. And that was their starting point for their definitions. If we're talking about the current situation in Silicon Valley, what model of intelligence of humanity are they starting with when they're trying to produce these products and platforms, and how does that concept filter down into the wider conversation about what it means to be human?
Playing chess, with all respect, as we know, is pretty easy, because Deep Blue just beats everybody. And
this was in the 1950s.
This
was a while ago.
I know. But those things are quite simple to do and to program. But the rest is not. And, that's why I'm going to keep going on making my plea for getting women in the conversation. So we don't even have a phrase like founding fathers. You just think, Ada Lovelace, she was there, right back with Babbage. And, all the women who worked for NASA, of course, when those first programs were coming out, they were the ones, because they thought programming was like for girls, because it didn't matter very much. So all the women were given these manuals, they're about 600 pages long, and sent home with dinner and said, can you work this out by tomorrow? And they did. They were doing the programming. And then, like everything else, it gets taken over as that suddenly becomes interesting. So it's about how we mustn't let things just get written out and then assume that being written out is just how history was, because it never is like that.
I like this great quote from Paul Romer, who was the 2018 Nobel Prize winning economist, and he said, tech is not like weather. It doesn't just happen to us. We are fundamentally responsible for shaping it. But it does feel a bit like that. It feels it's like, shit, it's all coming out, it's what we're going to do. But we've all, in our own little lives, all of us, got something we could do differently.
I was going to say, where I struggle with all this, and the frustration is going to come out, but where I struggle with this is if you talk to a machine learning scientist that's working in a normal company, they're not trying to solve the singularity, God forbid anybody talks about that shit, or anything ridiculous like that. They're sitting there in front of a bunch of mathematics with a bunch of data, trying to resolve a mathematical problem to a problem put in front of them. They're in no way, shape, or form sitting there trying to figure out how to make something feel or something think. So, and I know there's great events where we do, and I think we're allowed, David, to expand our mind and to play around. And I joke around with, I always use the quotes from The Sleeper. I told you guys the Woody Allen film. Have you seen it, The Sleeper? This dude gets cryogenically frozen for 50 years and wakes up to a world where cars are little bubbles that go around. He can't make them work, and people don't have sex. There's a sexotron. And you walk into the sexotron.
Orgasmatron.
Jeanette, this is
gosh, perfect.
And he just goes on and on in the most comedic way. Truth is, on average, we hear the 4 or 5 stories from some of the vendors that are trying to push the boundaries of the science, and certainly the university is trying to break the boundaries. But on average, people sit in front of a mathematical problem, optimize that problem, they figure out how to do pricing optimization for you better, they're trying to make that ethical and sound, and they crack on with their lives. And in some cases, they bolt together 3 or 4 of these things in a way that's slightly more meaningful, like a chatbot. Anybody use their special Alexa voice with our Alexa? You got your Alexa voice, right? Which you certainly wouldn't speak to anybody like that. Right? So, okay, we've got some of those limitations, but it's easy. We can dream. Let's be allowed to dream. Let's be allowed to think, but let's also come back.
So I think, yeah, absolutely. Let's dream, but also when people hype, right? The conventional defense is that hype is something that is done by others. So others in the media or others that don't understand the technology. And actually, I think if you look, one of the things that the history of AI in the 50s can tell us is that hype was coming right from the heart of the technology. And it was imbued with this model of what the human being is. So the example that I always like is when the thermostat was described as intelligent. I think it was by John McCarthy. And he said, well, a thermostat clearly has superhuman powers of temperature control. There is no way that any of us in this room could control the temperature as well as a thermostat does. Therefore, and that, you know, we need to be able to not puncture the hype, but understand what it includes, what it excludes, how to hold it to account, and to diversify that conversation as well.
But I guess, I mean, we have to say that there are implications for all of these things. I mean, certainly, I mean, I report on and spend a lot of time with engineers, and, you know, engineers' jobs are to build things and to solve problems. And so it doesn't surprise me that, you know, that's your focus, because it should be. But there are implications, especially with how powerful these technologies are getting. And I don't know, I always like to pose these thought questions, but I mean, is there ever a technology we wouldn't build? I mean, that's essentially what distinguishes us as a species. You know, we build tools, and, you know, they've served us pretty well, you know, by and large. I mean, we have some tools that, you know, do some pretty awful things, but mostly we're living pretty better than we used to, most people, et cetera. But we're reaching a point here where we may need to actually decide that. Like, do we actually want to put, I was trying to figure out, by the way, how many drivers there are, professional drivers in the world. Try to find it. It's very hard to find, but it's got to be in the hundreds of millions of people. Would we want to turn all those people out of work, you know, in a very, you know, quickly? Do we need to? Are there ways to combine humans and machines to be able to have you know, safe vehicles where, I mean, just because we can build a driverless car doesn't mean that we should actually embrace that technology worldwide very quickly. And, you know, there's a whole range of questions like that. And out of my part, or where I used to live in Silicon Valley, that was, you know, I'd pretty much be kicked out of the meeting at this point. But, you know, these are real questions, especially, again, you get into my field, synthetic biology. I mean, should we do some of these things? I mean, you know, we're getting to a point like with genetic and synthetic biology where, you know, we can build that super soldier. We can build that, you know, those superhumans. And, you know, even a thermostat, I mean, if it's turned up too high, you know, that can cause problems if it's way too hot or way too cold. I mean, you know, and it's mindless. It's not thinking about that.
But I don't think we should trap ourselves into thinking, is this about saying yes or no to particular technologies, or even, you know, one particular tone of voice at meetings like this is often, are you on the side of progress or are you against it? I think if you look at it...
We can't do that, though, can we? Because it's just another binary.
Well, no, absolutely. But I think that the possible futures ahead of us are far more plural than that. If you
it's got to be in between. I mean, there's got to be a happy medium.
The example of a transport system, for example, just look at how different Amsterdam looks from Los Angeles, right? And that's because of technological choices that have been made over the last, well, century, let's say, right? And that's not saying yes or no to technology. That's just making more or less wise decisions about what sorts of systems we would like to build using technology.
You know, and I don't know why it should be a guy thing, but it is. I mean, a bicycle doesn't seem to be that sexy to guys. They'd rather, you know, have a Ferrari with the wings coming up at the side, or at least a Tesla or something. And one of the great things about Amsterdam is that they just chose the bicycle, and they refused to widen their beautiful little streets. You know, they made they said no quite a lot, which is unusual. And perhaps we just have to accept that some things are already perfect, like a bicycle. Sure, you can you make an electric bicycle. An apple is perfect. It's the most convenient fast food you could ever get. An egg is perfect. You know, there's lots of stuff out there that we can't do better with. So why not keep them and just think, well, what's this question of what's the quality of life? Sure, you could have flattened Amsterdam and just be doing your race car right down it. But would we want to be there? No, we wouldn't. So I think those questions do really matter. In all the excitement of let's colonize space, let's have flying cars. You know, I don't want the boys' own version of the future. Sorry, guys, I really don't.
I like bicycles.
But you can apply that same logic, and I agree with you. You can apply that same logic to the more ephemeral objectives of let's make a really great Go-playing engine. The artificial intelligence that can do something that we can already do mentally, but scale it up. Do we need that as well? And I think that ties into the suggestion in the comments about narratives as well. The representation of what happened with AlphaGo presented as this is the next step onwards. Do we need that step when we have Masters of Go already? It's again, it's the Everest question. So do we scale it because it's there? And do we perhaps actually step back and say, well, these are not spaces in which we should be scaling into?
Well, that's what, again, this is not like electricity, which it exists, it's electrons flying. It's not that. It is many, many thousands of bits of mathematics that can be used in different things, that can be connected in different things. It's not one thing. There is no such thing as artificial intelligence. There is mathematics and there's data, and we make them work together. So the Go thing is very interesting in a particular field of mathematics that deals with pattern matching of type this. Very distinct from all the other things that we see around us that need to be. Come on, the simple example is how many of you, if I show you a picture of a swimming pool, right? Show you a picture, if I make some noise appear, children in a swimming pool, right? If I give you your senses, the 3 or 4 things that tell you what a swimming pool is, you immediately get your hand up and say it's a swimming pool. For me to make a machine do that, it would just be MacGyver, you know, like sticky tape and bubble gum, and you barely do that for a swimming pool. And no other thing in the world ever again. So, yeah, little by little Everests, but at the same time, this is not, let us not think that playing Go means we have intelligence.
And yet we still, though, talk about AIs we talk about artificial general intelligence. We talk about AI as a general purpose technology.
Quite.
And that, I think, is hugely unhelpful, because that means that we don't ask these questions about whose purposes. And I think, it's all about whose purposes.
And I think also arguing a little bit against Jeanette here with the gender thing. I've got an 18-year-old son who is feeling victimized by this whole men are shit thing too. And it's about diversity of opinion. It's about us together, people together, thinking about the people, thinking about each other and the purpose and the needs of humanity. And we've got our Sustainable Development Goal badges on. And I think it's almost not about individual genders or individual perspectives. It's about collaborative perspectives.
No, but it is about gender, look, because women don't run the world. It's about gender, It's not that men are shit. They're not. They're lovely, but it is about gender. And they'd love to have a flying car. You would, wouldn't you? You know you would.
I don't know, just really quickly.
I don't blame you, but it's a problem.
I mean, there are some things that humans do better, like having a discussion like this. I mean, I don't know, you could probably program robots to simulate a discussion like this. And even the swimming pool question, maybe we don't need to ask computers to identify a swimming pool.
Well,
I mean, there may be some reasons, right. And so, I don't know, is it possible to spend our time and energy and resources on using machines for the things that we really need them to help us with?
The danger is, as I explained in my presentation, where we're trying to fit humans into that system to fill in the gaps where it can't identify the swimming pool very well, but we can get the humans in a massive center somewhere to do that kind of work. So Google Duplex, recently there's been discovered that some of these calls are being made by humans in very low wage third world countries on behalf of a corporation. So we have to think about, yes, absolutely right, where we do and don't apply the technology, but where we give the appearance of fully applying the technology when actually it's humans being mistreated.
That's great. You start and you finish and you start. Perfect. We are exactly on time in a mechanistic sort of way.
Well
and I've
done.
had the laziest moderating session ever because everybody's been so fantastic. Maybe I am. Thank you very much to Beth, to David, to Jeanette, to Jack, and to Fernando.